All right. So this is a more advanced use case where we're actually storing data on a individual project rather than storing data at the entire site level. So you could have different instances of the same data object being stored in different projects, and that UI widget will show different things depending on the project. So to show you what I mean by this, I'm going to create two different data objects in two different projects and show you how they show up in the UI. So you see here we have app maker test, and we have this other just random test project. I'm going to create a test instrument here. Now they will both have the system status widget because the system status widget was created at the site level. So they both have the system status widget. Great. That's what we want. That's what we expected. Great. But we want, let's say the test project is monitoring one system and the AMT project is related to a different system. Well, you would need to store two different sets of the system status in order to have the right information showing in the right projects. You wouldn't just want one object, because if you had two systems writing to the one object, they would override each other every time one of them updated, and you would lose track of which system is in which state. So you would want to store that data either at the project level, ideally. Alternatively, you could store two different objects at the site level, but then it becomes difficult to tell each project which one of those two objects you want it to reference. So ideally what you want is a single widget that's shown across all projects that is told by the system, hey, look up a data object that's stored in your project's context, so the context of the project you're being rendered inside of, and get the data to display from that instead. So what we're going to do is we're going to create the data objects first. So I'm not going to do this through the API client because we've already shown you how to do that. Instead, I'm going to show you how to do that through the UI instead. Settings, I'm going to go apps, I'm going to go to custom apps, I'm going to go to data objects, nothing in here because we removed data objects before. I'm going to do new, and I'm going to grab an example from the documentation. I'm going to delete that at the top. So extended double quoted property name and nested blah, 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 blah. This often means there is a rogue comma at the end of a list or object. And I can see here message, there's a rogue comma there. That's correct. That's good. I'll update our documentation to make sure we fix that. So I'm going to change this to test. So what we're doing here, this looks very familiar because this is exactly the same object as you would have used on the previous video when we were creating a data object via the API. We're just doing it by the UI now because it's much faster to do it this way if you're actually the admin of the site and you're doing it by hand. You don't want to have to go and pull up an API client every time you want to change something. It's a bit fiddly. So we're going to go action is set. So we're setting an object. We're going to reset. Now this is where it's different. Resource type rather than site is now project, which means that we need a resource key. And the resource key is the key of the project that we want to store this data against. So I see that here we have a key is test. And then the other object, we want to go website, because we want to say that the website is online. And we're going to go API. I'm going to say the API is offline. So for the test project, the system the test project is monitoring, website is online, API is offline. Now just real quickly, I'm going to delete this to show you what happens. You'll see here it shows an error. So property title is required on data object update list. Now, what did I do? Oh, sorry. I removed the wrong thing. I'm going to remove this, the resource type. Now, that will actually throw an error if I save it because it knows that the resource key is required on resource type. It doesn't show you in real time here because it's conditional. Delete that. All right, so the data object as website online and API offline in the test project. So I'm going to copy this because I'm going to reuse most of this. Actually, you know what? I'll clone it instead. Save. Cool. So project system status is on project and it's got test. All right, I'm going to clone this now. and I'm going to change the resource key to AMT because I want a different data object for the AMT project than for the test project. And I'm going to change this to be offline for the website and online for the API. So this is all ready to go. I can ignore the other stuff. I can just save. Great. Now I have two project system status. They're both scoped projects, but one is scoped to the AMT project and one is scoped to the test project. All right, great. And they had different data on each. So let's go back to projects. Let's go back to AMT. Let's go back to here. And let's look at the widget. And you'll see it's empty. Well, hang on, why is it empty? We got the data objects. It's empty because this is still the old UI component. The old UI component was told to access the data object at the site level, not at the project level. So we need to update the system status widget to look for the data objects at the project level. Now, I'm going to close this, and just for reference, I'm going to open up the test project. I'm going to show you that and show you that that is exactly the same thing, an empty system status widget, which is what we would expect because there is no system status object at the site level anymore. So we move back to here, apps, custom apps. And I'm just going to jump across to the data objects tab and show you something quickly, which is that the title in these is project system status. Now that's different to the title of the data object from the previous video, which was just system status. That's relevant because we need to update the reference to these objects inside the UI component. So go back to the UI components, and I'm going to edit the UI component. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change this. So rather than saying data objects.site, it's data objects.project. And that way we're telling it to look at the data objects that are in the context of the project that this UI component is being shown inside of. And then I'm going to update the actual title of the data object to look up to be project system status in both. That's just to match what was in the data objects tab here. Now, if we created the data objects over here with just the project, with just system status as the title, we wouldn't need to update this, and it would still work perfectly fine because those two data objects with the same title are being held in the context of different projects, and so they won't override each other. We just created a different title here just to make it more explicit and clear that these are project level data objects. They don't need to have project in the name, just to be clear. That's just something we've done here to make it more obvious. I'm going to hit save. And then I am going to go to projects, and I'm going to go back to my AMT project. I'm going to open up the issue. And what you'll see here is that, all right, great. So in the AMT project, we have data. We didn't have data before when we loaded this up. And it says the website is offline and the API is online. And then if I close this and I go back to the test project and I open this issue up, you're going to see the same widget, but the data is reversed. So the website here is online and the API is offline. And the reason that's showing different data is because we're referencing different data objects. One data object is stored in the AMT project, and the other data object is stored in the test project. And the app maker system is sort of smart enough to go and look up the correct data object for that particular project that the UI component is inside of and get the data for that. So again, this is one of those really powerful features about Maker that sort of sets it apart from a lot of other tools. You don't need to sort of go and figure out how to find the project that the thing's being rendered inside of and look up all this. We do all of that for you. We just assume that if you've got a UI component and you're looking for project level data objects, it's the project that the UI component is being rendered inside of. Because that's what you're always going to be looking for in that context. So now you know how to put different data objects in different projects and show that information in a single UI widget, which means you haven't had to recreate this UI widget. You only have to have it once. You can also scope data objects to individual issues if you want to get really granular. And the way you do that is you just change the resource type to issue and the resource key to the Jira issue key, and that data object will be stored at the issue level. That's perfectly fine. You can do that. And you can also do some cool stuff like something we'll show you later on using what's called conditions, where you can have the data object being stored at the individual issue level or at the project level or at site level, but this is more useful in the issue level. And the entire widget will only display if the data object has data in it. And so if you're on an issue which doesn't have a data object, because you're not going to actually, you're not usually going to have data objects actually sort against every single issue. You might only have it maybe for like 1 in 5 or 1 in 3. If the data object is present, the widget will render. But if the data object is not present, the widget won't show at all. And so that way you're not cluttering up your Jira app with widgets that are showing sort of like empty boxes of information. You could even do that here if you wanted to. If you could say, look at, well, if there's no data for either of these fields, or if there's no data for both of these fields, just don't show the whole widget. And you could very easily do that now using what called conditions, which we'll go over in some future videos. All right. So you've gone over data objects. It's great. So now you know how to get data from outside of AppMaker and push it into AppMaker via the API. You know how to then scope that data either to like the site level or to the project level, and indeed even to the issue level if you really need to. And you know how to access that data from your UI and show it to users in the user interface so you can get that data back out to your users. All right. So next is going into what we mentioned a little bit earlier, which is what are called webhook transforms. Now, the reason webhook transforms are very important is because, as I mentioned before, when you have something like a CRM or a status system or any other external tool, most systems have webhooks, which are the ability to send data out via a HTTP request whenever something changes. But they send that data in a format or a shape that is specific to each individual source system. So a CRM is going to send it in one shape, and a system status monitoring tool is going to send it in a different shape. They're not going to send it in the shape that AppMaker expects data to be stored in. And that's a problem, because if you send data to, a data object and it's in the shape of a webhook from the system, it won't work, because you won't be able to do things like set the resource type or the resource key or the title, because those fields won't be in the webhook body. Now, to solve that, we've implemented a capability that we call webhook transforms. And webhook transforms are kind of the secret sauce, which makes AppMaker really, really powerful and really able to operate as a fully featured app development tool using data being pushed into it, because we allow you to receive those webhooks from external systems in any shape at all, and then transform them into the shape required to store them in AppMaker. You can dispose of all the data you don't care about, keep the data you do care about, and put it into the shape you need for it to be stored in AppMaker, so then you can show it in your UI. It's a really, really powerful capability. Previously, before, if you weren't using AppMaker, you would probably need to actually write your own little custom middleware or API or microservice to do this translation. And it's traditionally been one of the most labor-intensive parts of integrating systems, is getting the data from one system in one shape and just translating it into the shape that another system needs. AppMaker has that built in. So you remove all of that toil, that extra work, and that's what makes AppMaker a really, really powerful tool for integrating different systems into your Jira instance. So we'll go over that in the next set of videos.